I was looking for my Grammy's ring when I found him. Grammy had given me her ring before she died, and losing it felt like losing her. Mom forgot to pay the electricity bill again, and I only felt safe with the ring. I will say, as a child, our house was always dark. I did get used to it eventually. Mom couldn't afford electricity, so we usually sat in candlelight. But when Mom was passed out after drinking too much, my brother and I were stuck. Grammy's ring was the only thing that made me feel safe. I knew I was wearing it in the yard while playing in the flowers after school, and the thought of a night without it twisted my gut. Before she passed, my grandma was our unofficial guardian. After school, we would walk all the way to her house, and she would make us dinner and let us watch TV. But after she died, we didn't have anyone. Just Mom and a pitch-dark house. The sky was darkening when I rushed outside, kneeling in Mom's flower garden. Ross, my brother, sometimes locked me out if I stayed out too long. His fear stemmed from our father coming home from work when we were younger and destroying the kitchen if his dinner wasn't made. Not much to say about Dad. He left us a year later. Yes, he took all Mom's savings, but the house was quiet. Sometimes I intentionally sat in the yard at night. Our neighbors usually watched TV at 8 p.m. and I could see the reflection in the front window. I once watched a whole episode of a TV show. I had no idea what it was, but I think it was about space. On that particular night, it was too cold to sit outside. I was wearing Mom's coat over my pajamas, grasping my flashlight. Ross's face was in the window, lit up by Mom's phone, also our only light. I gestured for him to leave the door open, and he just pressed his face against the glass, making kissy faces. Ever since Dad left, my brother insisted on being the male of the house, repeating what Dad would always say. When we did have electricity, rarely, my brother would force me to microwave him frozen meals because he was the male of the house now that Dad was gone. I wasn't expecting him to leave the door unlocked, which meant another night of crawling up the drainpipe and through my bedroom window. I focused on Grammy's ring. Kneeling in the flowers, I grasped at anything: rocks, pebbles, crumbling flower buds, old beer cans. A voice startled me, and I almost toppled over. "It's over here." The squeak came from a wilted rose, and I briefly wondered if I was seeing things. Bobby, one of my friends in elementary school, once bragged that his father ate mushrooms and thought he was a bird. I became fascinated with the idea, and Bobby and I spent a whole slumber party googling mushrooms. I vaguely remembered my mother planting some when we were younger, but they were the edible kind, the ones she used in her winter soup. So, if I wasn't seeing things, if I wasn't high on mushroom spores, then what exactly did I hear? "Hello? I'm sorry, you blind? I'm down here." All I could see was my mother's flower bed. I shined my flashlight on it, peering closer, and there, when I crawled directly into a crushed rosebush, was a glowing ball of light. I found myself mesmerized by it, hypnotized by light that I wasn't used to. Whipping my head around, I searched for my brother. His shadow was gone. Closer now, the ball of light morphed into a tiny human perched on a leaf, legs swinging. The boy looked like a high schooler, glass wings poking from his back, a scowl on his face. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Mom used to warn Ross and me about the fairies when we were little. She said it was the fairies who stole our toys, made us sneeze, and the fairies who chased away our father. Ross didn't believe in them, but I was always intrigued. I asked my friends at school if they had fairies at the bottom of their yards, and they thought I was weird. I remember Mom telling us, if you do a fairy a favor, they will return it by granting you a wish. But she also warned, if you hurt a fairy, you will pay for it, and your children will pay for it, and your children's children's children will suffer. They will hunt to the end of your bloodline, and even then, their mere presence will drive adults insane. I wondered if she'd gotten that from a book. Before she started drinking, Mom used to tell us stories about the fairies in our yard, and how, when she was a little girl, she helped a captive fairy prince, freeing him from her neighbor's bell jar. Maybe they were protecting her after all. The one in front of me was scowling, before his expression softened. "Hi," the fairy whispered, tilting his head. He looked maybe 17 or 18. I had no idea how that translated to fairy years. Contrary to what books, movies, and TV shows had led me to believe, Barbie, Fairytopia being my only real reference, fairies didn't wear dresses. The one in front of me was dressed in scraps of human clothing, an old checkered shirt wrapped around his torso, strips of denim for pants, and a satchel slung across his chest. I leaned closer, spying a clothes tag sticking from his back. He was definitely wearing the material of one of my father's old shirts. His satchel, or at least the faux leather holding it together, looked very similar to my mom's bag. I don't think I fully put into words what I was seeing. A real fairy sitting in my mother's flower garden. He wore a wry smile, Unlike the boys at school who teased me for having holes in my shoes and no gym uniform, his smile was friendly. "Here's your silver thingy." He gave his curls a shake, my Grammy's ring crowning him. "Can you maybe take it off my head?" He stood, throwing out his arms to keep balance, and slowly, I reached forward and plucked Grammy's ring from his curls, revealing his real crown, an entanglement of flowers, vines, and tiny mushrooms. He backed away, quickly hiding behind the shadow of a rosebud. "I'm not supposed to talk to you," he said, shifting nervously. "I didn't tell my father I was here, so I should probably go home before he gets mad." I found myself wondering if placing him in a bell jar and using him as a lantern would help me sleep. His light stole away my breath. It pulsed like a living thing, spiderwebbing down delicate glass wings sticking from his back. I shook my head, shaking away the thought. But I did want to touch his light. I wanted to know if it was ice cold or maybe warm. Mom told me she had only ever held a fairy once. I introduced myself, hesitantly holding out my palm. I didn't realize I was shaking until I quickly retracted my hand, swiping my clammy fingers on my pajamas. Lit up in otherworldly golden light, his skin porcelain, almost translucent, wide green eyes blinked at me. "Jude," he said, his wings twitching. He hopped onto my hand, wobbling and throwing his arms out to balance himself. "Prince Jude." He smiled proudly, pointing to his crown. Jude and I became friends, and he introduced me to his family. His father was, understandably, absent. I spent a lot of time in the yard, so eventually, Ross caught on. He followed me one day, springing out at me when I was talking to Jude. Initially, he thought I was talking to a butterfly. Ross liked Jude, immediately holding out his palm for the fairy to land on, especially when he realized the fairy could help us with our light problem. Jude said, in exchange for our full names, he would happily act as light for us until we fell asleep. I was more than happy to comply. I gave him our names, and Jude became a regular visitor, sitting on top of the microwave with his legs swinging, illuminating the counter so we could prepare food. Jude showed off, dancing across my dead phone screen, causing it to flicker on and off. Ross was impressed, his eyes wide. "Wait, so you can make things actually work?" Jude shrugged. "If there's enough of us. I mean, sure." There was one night when Ross accidentally sat on him, and he squeaked in pain, buzzing around like an angry mosquito, a glowing ball of light growing brighter and brighter, until the whole room was lit up. It was so bright, like an overexposed photo, light bleeding into the darkness of the hallway, lighting up the living room doorway. Ross apologized, and Jude instantly forgave him, telling us anecdotes of his family and world, and how he had grown up as a reluctant prince. According to him, Jude didn't want to be a prince. However, as the son of the king, he was the rightful heir to the throne. Fairies don't like candy. I was surprised too. I grew up with Mom whispering in my ear, "Leave a berry at the bottom of the yard, and perhaps he will come see you." I offered Jude a chunk of gummy worm, and he spat it out. Jude said his kind eat an assortment of foods, but are carnivores. He showed me his teeth, elongated spikes, and I wished he hadn't. I guess I was just a kid. I thought fairies were mini versions of humans, with wings of a butterfly. When Mom described them, she always painted them as creatures from a fairy tale. I didn't expect them to have teeth sharp enough to rip through my finger. Still, Jude was my friend. He had sharp teeth, but he didn't scare me. Jude came to see me at night, sitting on my window, a glowing ball of orange comforting me in the dark. Mom never came to tuck me in or say goodnight, so his light really did help. When I turned 10 years old, I went to France on a school field trip for a week. I told Ross to look after Jude, and Jude to keep an eye on my brother. I remember the France trip wasn't as fun as I thought it would be. I spent the whole time missing Jude and his family, and my brother, who wasn't answering my texts or calls. I came down with food poisoning after eating slimy-looking clams. One girl puked all over her seat on the plane, and our teacher almost had a nervous breakdown. But it was my brother's lack of contact that contorted my gut into knots. I texted him almost 50 times over the duration of 3 days, and I didn't even get a read receipt. When I returned home, I was relieved to find Jude perched on a daffodil. He seemed quieter than normal, and I admit, as a 10-year-old kid, I wanted him to miss me and say how excited he was for me to be back. Jude didn't speak much at all that night. I remember it was summer, so I spent most of the afternoon and evening hanging out with him, but he didn't speak. Eventually, when I poked him, offering him honey, he was obsessed with honey. It's the fairy equivalent of getting high. He opened up to me, hopping onto my outstretched palm. "My friends are disappearing," he said softly. I noticed he was glowing brighter, all of the color drained from his cheeks, dark circles prominent under his eyes. He sighed, laying down in my palm. I liked that he trusted me enough to be vulnerable. Jude once told me his father was against him talking to humans. The king saw us as parasites and evil looming monstrous things. Dad thinks it's a human, Jude sighed, rolling around in my palm, pressing his face into his arms. I told him it's not. Humans are nice. I have 2 human friends, he explained, in the gentlest of tones, and I could tell it really did hurt him to say it, but he couldn't see me anymore. I'll be king in a month, so Dad doesn't want me to explore anymore. Jude didn't say goodbye. I think he was too emotional. He just told me it was nice knowing a friendly human, before hopping off my wrist and flying away, a single buzzing light disappearing into the tree. I was determined to find his missing friends, so I did what I could. I set honey traps, trying to lure them out from wherever they were. I figured they had run away from home. I had the naive idea that finding them would bring Jude back, and my kindness would prove humans are good, and Jude's father was wrong about us. I drew up plans to find Jude's friends, and bring them back to the kingdom. Ross had been quiet ever since I got back from France. He said he was doing homework in his room, but when I bothered checking, he was curled up under his blankets with a flashlight, the beam illuminating his shadow. When I asked what he was doing, he held up a copy of Carrie. I'm reading, he grumbled, so I left him alone. Jude's friends were nowhere to be seen. I gave up halfway through summer vacation, when it was clear Jude wasn't coming back, and I was wasting my time. It had been months since I'd last seen him, and I had spent the majority of the time, when I wasn't searching for the missing fairies, playing with my new friends. I didn't tell them about Jude, or the fairies, or even where I lived. I was embarrassed of our neighborhood. I was embarrassed of our broken gate, our uncut lawn that was almost up to my knees, and my mother's refusal to actually be a parent. With these new friends, I could be a whole other person. Frankie, without the father who left, and an alcoholic mother. Frankie, whose brother hadn't spoken to me in weeks. However, when my friends were pulled inside for dinner, I had no choice but to return home. With Jude, was bearable. I could forget that I hadn't washed my hair in weeks because we didn't have money for shampoo, or that the other girls in class were already pointing out lice crawling in my hair. With Jude, I could forget about all of that. Without him, without my parents and brother, and grandma, I was starting to feel empty. I stepped inside my house, surprised by the unfamiliar light of the TV. Mom was already passed out on the couch, but it looked like she'd been watching a game show. Dad's crystal lamp, normally switched off, was lit up, brighter than normal. I had to shade my eyes, blinking through intense white light. I opened the refrigerator, comforted by light, and pulled out a bottle of water. It was ice cold. I was so used to lukewarm. Mom had finally paid the electricity bill. I can't describe how fucking relieved I was. I had a hot shower, and made myself a frozen meal. I could hear my brother playing video games, screaming threats at the screen. I poked my head through the door. Did Mom pay the electricity bill? Ross rolled his eyes, smashing buttons, slumped on his beanbag. Obviously, I threw a stuffed animal at him, and he, of course, lobbed it back, aiming for my face. I glimpsed a faded glitter of light under his blankets. Is your flashlight faulty? I asked. Ross's gaze didn't leave the TV screen. I was using it as a reading light, but the stupid thing won't work properly. It's broken. I told him he could have mine, and that was the first time my brother smiled at me. Thanks. I ran upstairs to grab my mother's laptop to do homework. This was the first time we had electricity in months, and I was going to take advantage, but it was when I entered my room. My bedside lamp was too bright. The amount of times I had wished for it to be turned on during winter nights when it was so cold, and not even my blankets could warm me up. The cold, dark bulb had always been painful, like being stabbed in the back. Light was so close, and yet so far, but I couldn't reach it. I rushed over to turn it off, but something stopped me dead. Voices, tiny screeching squeaks. Swallowing bile, I inched closer, peering into the lamp. The sight sent me retracting, my stomach in my throat, my cheeks burning. I could see their tiny bodies cruelly taped to the burning bulb, tossing, turning, and flailing. Their skin dripped from their bones and caught alight. Glowing hair burned from their scalps, revealing the white bone of tiny fairy skulls. Their innocent screams sent me stumbling back, dropping onto my knees. I'll never forget that image. It's burned into my mind. I'll never forget their screams. The more they cried, begged, and screeched, the brighter the light burned, scorching the bulb. Pain made them brighter. The realization made me heave. I didn't think. Stifling my sobs, I burned my finger, plucking Yui, Jude's older brother, from the lamp, tearing him from the cruel duct tape restraints pinning him down. I first met Yui when he got tangled in my hair, and I laughed so hard I almost puked trying to pull him out of my thick ponytail. He was kind, college-aged, with stories of his time overseas. Yuri teased Jude like my brother teased me, pushing him off flower buds and ruffling his hair. Yuri wasn't moving, his head hanging, his wings charred. I could see where half of his face had peeled away, leaving pearly white bone framing a skeletal grin. When I gently prodded him, panicking, his head lolled forwards. He was dead, and yet somehow, he was still producing light. "What are you doing?" Ross snatched Yuri from my grasp, squeezing the fairy between his fist. I felt sick, watching intense golden light bleeding through his fingers. Without a word, he placed Yuri back inside the lamp, tightening the duct tape over his tiny body. I noticed Yuri's wings twitching slightly. He wasn't dead, but was so close. Ross turned to me, and I remember my brother's eyes terrified me. "You said you wanted light," he snapped, gesturing to the lamp. "So, I got us light." I tried to protest, tried to free Jude's brother. Ross shoved me into the wall. "If you touch them," he spat, "I will fucking kill you." I tried to get past him. I tried to save Jude's brother. This time, I snatched him up, and Ross pulled him from my grasp, shoving him in his jeans pocket. He treated them like dolls. "We have light." That's what Ross kept saying, but he was fucking hurting them. "They are giving us light, Frankie." When Ross locked me out of the house again, I tried to call to Jude. I was ashamed of my brother, but lying to him felt wrong. But Jude never came back. Fortunately for me, all children get bored and move to the next thing. After spending weeks torturing fairies for light, my brother started hanging out with friends from school. So, when I had the opportunity, I freed every single fairy, and tried to help them, nursing them back to health. 15 fairies survived out of 25. I only remember several of their names. Lyra, who was my brother's nightlight. Flora, who was glued to the kitchen bulb. Jax and Svan, twins, inside my brother's bedside light. Yuri was dead. I won't describe him, because doing so would be disrespectful. I buried him in the yard with the others, and said a prayer for them. The TV was still switched on when I slumped onto the couch next to my unconscious mother. The television confused me, because I was sure it was a single fairy per electrical appliance. But when I checked the outlet, there were no fairies. I had saved every fairy, and every time I freed one, my house was noticeably darker, but it did have electricity. I checked the refrigerator, oven, and my brother's PS4. Above me, the kitchen bulb flickered on, and then off. Somehow, my house did have electricity, but it was weak. So, what was causing it? Hesitantly, I crept down to the basement where the generator was, and already, I could hear it, the furious buzzing of wings, sharp cries of pain. Jude was cruelly hooked up to the machine, his tiny, scrambling body pulsing like a heart among colorful wires and flashing buttons. His light had dimmed, flickering weakly. One wing was gone, the other, shredded. When I reached out with trembling fingers to pluck him from the wires, they wouldn't let go. Ross had forced them inside him, using him not just as a generator of light, but a battery. His eyes flickered as they found me, rolling back and forth, unfocused. I pulled him as gently as I could, untangling him from the cruel wires threaded through his skin, wrapped around his head. He didn't reply when I spoke his name. His lips quivered, sharp, panicked breaths sending him into coughing fits. His body burned with fever, his clothes clinging to him, blood trickling from his nose. I tried to snap him out of it, but his wings weren't moving. When I whispered his name, he didn't respond, his chest shuddering. I knew he wasn't going to make it. When I cupped him in my hand, he lay still, moving only when I prodded him. I tried bathing him with a sponge to ease the burns to his face, but it's like his body was giving up. I dropped him in a panic, and he just lay there. His father was right. When Jude's light started to erupt brighter and brighter, I laid him down in my mother's roses. I tried to bury him, but burying him didn't feel right. I sat for so long in the dirt trying to think of a way to make things right and honor his memory, but I didn't know what to say to him. I didn't know what to tell his father. I felt sick with guilt. That same night, my mother came to her senses. She sat up with wide eyes, her lips trembling. "What did you do?" When I couldn't respond, she grabbed my shoulders, screaming in my face. "What did you do?" Her eyes were filled with tears, red raw, like she knew. I admitted to her that Ross had killed a fairy, and I didn't know what to do. Mom didn't speak. It's like she was in a trance. She stood up slowly, grabbed matches, stormed outside, and set her flower bed alight. When I tried to stop her, she told me if she didn't, then I would die. Mom told me, when losing someone you love, death is the kindest way. Her voice dropped into a sharp cry. "That's not what they do. They will hunt you. They will make you wish you were dead." She shook me, tried to hug me, her breath ice cold against my ear. "Please, baby," she whispered. "Tell me you didn't give them your names." I couldn't answer. "Frankie." Mom made me look at her. Her lips parted in a silent cry. "You didn't, right?" She began to moan, like an animal, her eyes rolling back. She started to chant, "Please tell me you didn't give the fairies with teeth your names. Please tell me you didn't give the fairies with teeth your names. Please tell me you didn't give the fairies with teeth your names." Mom was arrested when the neighbor caught her dancing barefoot across the burned flower bed, singing a language I didn't understand. My brother and I were placed into CPS and moved states. Thankfully, I was placed with a different family, while Ross lived with our aunt. I entered my teens and had a pretty much normal life. I live with a new. This morning, I woke to screams that are still haunting me now. My stepmother's shrieks wouldn't stop, slamming into me. I heard the thud of my stepsister running down the stairs, and then her screech. Harry was face down in our front yard, a giant hole in the back of his head, like something had burrowed through his skull. I ran upstairs to grab my phone to call the cops, and a spot of light caught my eye. Sitting on the window, his legs swinging, arms folded, was Jude. He was older, crown adorning thick brown curls. His wings were still slightly charred, but he was alive. I didn't recognize his eyes. I remembered them being filled with warmth and curiosity. Now they were hollow, sparkling with madness. Jude smiled widely, before spitting a chunk of fleshy pink on the windowsill. He didn't speak, didn't explain himself. Instead, he shot me a two-fingered salute, and flew away, buzzing orange light, that I swear, was laughing. Look, I know he's doing this for his brother, but I'm terrified he's going to kill me. He killed my brother, and my stepbrother. Does Jude even know I tried to save him? Is he punishing me? What should I do? Mom is locked up in a psych ward, and she burned all of her books. I just need to know, how do I keep him away from me? Edit 2. Something is seriously fucking wrong. I just got a call from my stepmom. Harry is okay. He's coming home right now. Mom thinks it's a miracle. She keeps telling me Harry can't wait to talk to me. That's all she's saying. Harry keeps saying how excited he is to talk to you. He can't wait to see you. But how can he be okay?